punta naman tayo sa standard measure. And let us discuss how the term standard differ from the term norm. So minsan, there is an interchange upon the usage of the term norm and standard. However, may pagkakaiba ang dalawa. Ang norm is more of a trend or the typical and may or may not be equivalent to a standard. Norm can and does usually move over time, whereas si standard ay absolute measure as to what things should be. The standard does not change most of the time, but you may choose a different standard. Hindi naman totally na di nag-change, pero kung ma-change man ang isang standard, maraming kailangan na i-consider more than referring to a mere trend. So, let's set this as an example, hypothetical example. So, as you can observe in the picture na nasa screen, ang picture na sa left, ito ang standard na uniform na requirement para sa PE na sinet ng isang school. Kaso, may ibang mga estudyante na hindi ito sinusunod dahil sa karamihan sa mga kaklase nila ay yung nasa right na picture ang sinusunod. Naka jeans, tapos naka t-shirt. So, that is the norm. Kasi yun ang usual o usual at inaalaw naman ng teachers. Pero it does not necessarily denotes na yun na yung standard. See, hindi ibig sabihin na kung ito yung norm, ito na rin ang standard. Kasi, ang norm nagfa-fluctuate. Parang sa paggawa ng test, may mga standard guidelines na dapat i-follow to consider that a test is standardized. So, how standard is standard measurement? Let's define first some terms. So, si standard can be a noun, an adjective, and it can also be a verb. So, standard as a noun. Standard as a noun may be defined as that which others are compared to or evaluated against. Si ganito, paano mo masasabi na pandak ka? O bakit mo nasabi na di ka kataasan? That is because kinukumpara mo ang sarili mo sa isang standard na height na kinukonsider. Furthermore, kung ang standard ng mataas ay yung height mo, masasabi mong mataas ka base sa standard na iyon. Particular ito sa mga paaralan na may standard height requirement. Like for example, PNPA na may height requirement, let's say 5'11". So, para makapasok ka, or makapasok ang isang applicant, kailangang makapasa siya sa standard height na iyon, regardless kung gaano siya kataas in comparison sa buong populasyon na nagpasa ng application. Kahit na ikaw ang pinakamataas sa lahat ng aplikante pero di ka nakapasa sa standards, di ka pa rin makakapasok. So, standard as an adjective. Standard as an adjective often refers to what is usual, generally accepted, or commonly employed. One may speak, for example, of the standard way of conducting a particular measurement procedure, especially as a means of contrasting it to some newer or experimental measurement procedure. Sa mga test, may mga standard na dapat i-consider upon stating that the test is standard. At kapag nakapasa ang isang test sa standard na iyon, pwede na siyang tawaging standard test. Next, to standardized. So, ito yung verb form ng word na standard. This refers to making or transforming something into something that can serve as a basis of comparison or judgment. Ito yung pagkakataon that someone sets the standard na kung saan kukompare ang mga bagay-bagay. May it be related sa behavior, related sa score sa isang test. For example, in the word standardized test na nasa next slide, this referred for the tests that have clearly specified procedures for administration, scoring, and interpretation, in addition to norms. Such tests also come with manuals that are as much a part of test package as the test item. So, ito yung mga test na evaluate based on what is the standard of a standardized test. So, for example, yung 16 PF or 16 personality factor ni Raymond Cattell na nasa right na picture, bago siya na-consider na isang standardized test, dumaan muna siya sa isang pagsusuri at mga evaluation by experts in the field of measurements who sets the specific standard to meet um, for a standardized test. Next, standardization. So, standardization is the process. Conceivably, the term standardization could be applied to standardizing all the elements of a standardized test that need to be standardized. The process employed to introduce objectivity and uniformity into the test administration, scoring, and interpretation. So, balik tayo sa example ko sa 16PF ha. So, bago siya naituring na isang standardized na test, ay dumuan muna siya sa process na tinatawag na standardization. Anong gagamitin sa process na ito? Siyempre, yung standard na sinet ng mga experts in the field. May mga guidelines kasi na binigay particularly sa book na Standards for Educational and Psychological Testing na kung saan nakasaad lahat ng standards na related sa testing and measurement. Later, ipapakita ko ang ilan sa or isang bahagi nito pagkatapos ng next slide na ito. Or pagkatapos nating mag-discuss ang terms sa next slide. Type of standard error. So, standard error of measurement, a statistic used to estimate the extent to which observed score deviates from the true score. Standard error of estimate. In regression, an estimate of the degree of error involved in predicting the value of one variable from another. So, standard error of the mean, a measure of sampling error. Standard error of the difference, a statistic used to estimate how large the difference between two scores should be before the difference is considered statistically significant. So, ang mga terms na ito ay may katumbas na equivalent. Base na rin yan sa standard na sinet ng mga statisticians, more of which is discussed during our psychological statistics na subject. Ang point lang nito is that mayroon palang standard na dapat i-follow ang mga researchers or other professionals kasi more than being one that is usual, the standards being set were carefully crafted out from vast research as well. Ginamit ito to compare if mayroon bang kalabisan o kakulangan sa mga bagay-bagay where in measurement is applicable as well. Kasi kung iisipin mo, kung walang standard na isiset, for example, magkakaiba tayo ng measure when it comes to inch, centimeter, millimeter, etc. And if it concerns to testing, kung walang standard na dapat i-meet, magkakaiba ng threshold na dapat iset or na dapat makamtan to consider na, ito, may anxiety na siya, ito, introverted na ito na tao. So, ganito kahalaga kung bakit kailangan mag-set ng isang standard. So, sa next slide, as what I have mentioned, I get some portion of the book entitled The Standards for Educational and Psychological Testing. So, ito yung book kung saan nakasaad ang mga standards for psychological testing and educational na testing. So, ang kinuha ko na portion is the standards for test design and development. So, standard 4.0. Test and testing programs should be designed and developed in a way that supports the validity of interpretations of the test scores for their intended uses. Standard 4.1. Test specifications should describe the purpose or purposes of the test, the definition of the construct or domain measured, the intended examinee population, and the interpretation for intended uses. Standard 4.2. In addition to describing the intended uses of the test specifications should define the content of the test, the purpose, proposed length, and the item format, the desired psychometric properties of the test items. Standard 4.3. Test developers should document the rationale and supporting evidence for the administration, scoring, and reporting rules used in computer adaptive, multi-stage adaptive, or other tests delivered using computer algorithms to select items. Standard 4.4. If the test developers prepare different versions of a test with some change to the test specifications, they should document the content and psychometric specification of each version. Standard 4.5. If the test developer indicates that the conditions of the administration are permitted to vary from one test taker or group to another, permissible variation in condition for administration should be identified. Standard 4.6. When appropriate to documenting the validity of the test scores, interpretation for intended uses, relevant expert external to the testing program should review the test specifications to evaluate their appropriateness for intended uses of the test scores in fairness to intended test takers. So, standard for educational testing and psychological testing, PDF is available. So, you can refer to this book so you could evaluate or can see kung ano ba yung mga standards na dapat i-meet in testing. So, sa susunod na slide, I provided some links of various kinds of psychological tests, their demos, and the number of tests present on this link. So, you could check these links para ma-enrich pa ang inyong knowledge about different psychological tests. And sa slide 23, papakita ko sa inyo kung anong laman niya. So, ito yung homepage na nasa slide 23. Sa slide 24 naman, nagbibigay rin ng website na ito ng list of most used na mga psychological test. So, makikita nyo, nakarank yan. Nangunguna yung WISE, sinundan ni Roscoe, and TAT, so on and so forth. Tapos, sa slide 25, ang website ay nagbibigay rin ng information about different psychological tests, their background, sino ang gumawa sa kanila, so saan sila gagamitin. Kagaya ng nasa slide 25 about cognitive tests. So, you could check the website para ma-enrich din ang knowledge nyo about different psychological tests.